Good day to all you safety champions out there and welcome on board of season number 4 of the AviAssist focus sessions. It's easy to forget that thousands of professionals in Africa, you and my guest here at the table, work hard every day at making commercial aviation the safest form of transport, also in Africa. And you don't do that because you expect special recognition. You think safety and act in ways that promote safety because you know the aviation industry and your country depends on that, and because it is the right thing to do. With the focus sessions, AviAssist brings you affordable and certified continuous professional development to help raise the bar on safety in Africa. We inform, inspire and entertain African aviation safety in our focus sessions. We will also be answering questions from you, our viewers. We may not have time for all your questions, but we'll do our best to get through as many as we can. This episode is sponsored by aviation insurance broker and risk advisor WTW. And today we'll be talking about change management. One thing we can be certain of is that there will always be change in our industry. Without change, there is no growth, no discovery and no development. And with change, there is always risk, but also opportunity. The challenge is to find the balance between the risks and the opportunity. Another thing we can be fairly certain of is that there will be resistance against changes. People don't seem to like it. What must we do to get the cooperation from our colleagues and manage those changes? How can we adopt a formal change management process, to help us achieve our objectives and maximize opportunity while minimizing the risks? This session aims to provide you with valuable guidance on how to plan for and manage change. I'm joined at the table by 3 guests from across the industry. And 2 of my guests today are great examples of how people with a training background away from aviation also can pursue a great career in aviation. My first guest is Professor of Safety and Accident Investigation at the world-famous Cranfield University in the United Kingdom. Professor Graham Braithwaite is a regular speaker across the globe on aviation safety and an independent safety advisor for 2 major airlines, including British Airways. A warm welcome to you, Graham, and privileged to have you here to share your knowledge and insights.
Thank you. It's really good to be on the panel. Thanks.
Thanks. My second guest is started his training actually with a diploma in hotel management. Bruce Mukabi entered the aviation industry as a ramp supervisor with Air Kenya, spent quite some years working in the United Arab Emirates from a ground handling company called Nata and Emirates Airlines, and now heads up quality assurance, safety and security with one of our sponsors, Safarilink Kenya. Karibu Bruce, welcome to the studio. Great to have you with us today.
Thank you, it's my distinct pleasure.
Did you have a good trip over here?
Oh yes, brilliant.
Okay,
Yeah,
we'll talk about that later on. And our third guest today, initially trained as an accountant. Her first job in aviation was as a travel center account officer. She then grew into various audits and compliance roles and now heads up safety as the manager risk at Overland Airways in Nigeria. Welcome to the table, Aderonke.
It's nice being here.
And did you have a good trip over here?
Yes, it was a wonderful trip.
A wonderful trip.
Thank
Into the cold climates of Holland, I'm sure.
Yes, I had a good trip. Thank you.
Well, welcome as well to you, and great to have such a diversity of voices represented here at the table from East Africa, West Africa and Europe as well. Let's get started on change management. And I think, Graham, if I could start with you, if we try to take change management apart as a process, what are some of the main components of that?
I think the first thing is to have a clear focus on what the change is that you're trying to make, define what that is. And then from that, really what we're concerned about are what new risks that might introduce into the business or the process. So then the process of evaluating that risk, really important. And then the other bit that's so important is making a decision about what risk to accept. Everything we do will carry our risk, and it is for the leadership to ultimately decide what is an acceptable risk to do what you're trying to do. And then the last thing is really to make sure that we document that process, because we might need to revisit it, change our decision, update our decision, or even to just verify that it was the correct one. So I don't think it needs to be especially complex, but it's about being very mindful about that process of change.
Bruce, is that something you recognize from your experience in
Oh, certainly, yeah. And probably just to add on what Graham says, there's an aspect of a formal approach towards management of change. This is looking at defining exactly what that change is and then coming up with a sequence of actions to make sure that you cover through any gaps, just to make sure that you look at the risks and define the length at which each and every risk poses in terms of the change, how the organization is going to adapt to the changes. And that is exactly what Graham is saying, just to add on that.
Okay. And I think we both heard you speak about what the change is going to be, but I can imagine, Aderonke, if you go back to your experience, do we also have to explain why we want to make the change, perhaps?
Definitely, we have to explain why, because the change will be implemented by people. And if no proper explanation is given, you should expect a resistance for that change.
So that's one of the first steps, perhaps, to explain why the change is coming into play.
Yes, defining the change and what exactly will the change achieve is very important to communicate that to people. Communication is very important in change management.
Okay, we'll get to that in a later point as well, I'm sure, because indeed that's what you see in many of those change management processes, the various steps of communication indeed. I'd like to come to a question of one of the viewers in Kenya, actually. Maybe if I can bring this one to you, Bruce. It's a fellow countryman of yours, Samuel Okalebo. He asks, to what extent would SMS training assist in managing risks? So his view, I think, is really, or his question is, would a broad understanding of SMS also help with change management?
Certainly. I think SMS training exposes people to appreciate a formal approach towards things and define what the scope is. So I'd say SMS training impacts a lot when it comes to change, and it helps a lot when it comes to change. To the scale of 1 to 10, just on the efficacy of training aspect, I think I will comfortably rate it at an 8. Training might not solve all the problems, but it certainly sure has an impact when it comes to management of change.
Management of change. And would that just, I don't know, if you look at the changes you've been going through as Overland Airways, would that just be, for example, training on SMS, or do you normally also train a particular group of people on actually change management?
Yes, apart from the SMS training, there are certain training that you need to expose people to in terms of change management, the management of change. And there's a process for management of change, which involves the risk analysis. Because the change is going to bring a new risk to the existing risk of the organization. And like Professor said, it is important to know the risk that will be acceptable or not, but the risk assessment must be performed.
Okay, and well, I mean, you mentioned Professor Graham as well at the table. We have different people at the table, different backgrounds. Great to have you as well from Cranfield. Is that also, because you also operate aircraft at Cranfield University and undoubtedly have gone through changes there, maybe the addition of a new aircraft. Do you then actively train people on change management, or do you leave that just to the people that are in charge of the change?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we've had to adopt a more and more structured approach to it because more and more people have been involved in it, and some of that change wasn't necessarily initiated by us. So you're right, we used to operate a Jetstream 31 as a flying classroom and laboratory, and we decided we needed to retire that and chose the Saab 340 as an alternative platform. We acquired the aircraft in 2019 and started a modification process in early 2020. In retrospect, that was absolutely the worst possible time to do a project of that complexity, because we had an aircraft in Sweden during a global pandemic, whilst then the UK chose to leave the European Union. So our regulator was going to change. So actually what you had was the impact of an unexpected event, which then changed timescales, and the timescale then changed the regulator, which meant that if we hadn't done a continuous process of change management, then something would have come to bite us in all of that, and we would, and so it was a really, really useful process to us. some of the change we absolutely had to communicate to people as being what we wanted to do, and then some of it was put upon us, but we needed to have some way of dealing with that and the consequences of it. So I think I lost most of my hair thanks to the entry into service project for that aircraft.
And I can imagine, I mean, maybe if I can take this to you, Bruce, I mean, if you look at the flying operations at Cranfield, it's relatively small, 3 aircraft, I think, at the moment. An organization, a company like Safarilink is much bigger, and you've grown a lot. How has that been for you? Is it, because I can imagine if you're a bigger organization, on the one hand, it may be difficult to affect change, but at the same time, maybe you have more people available who know about how to manage change. Is that what you see, or?
Oh, yes. Good question. Now, practical aspects of this is getting people to buy into the change first, to understand the process. No
matter if you're a small or a big organization.
Yes. I think these are the principles. So it's quite important to make sure that everyone who's involved in, and there are 2 different segments of people. So there's the main stakeholders in the whole system, in the change, and then we have the collateral beneficiaries in that. So you have to make sure that the main stakeholders are included in each and every aspect of the change. If, for instance, the needs analysis determine that you have to carry out training, then you have to define what the training needs for each specific stakeholder, and then make sure first they understand before you bring them into the training.
They understand the need of the training, or the need of the change, sorry.
Yeah, they understand the scope of the change and how that is going to impact the whole process. And I think that is quite key. Now, case in point is in a small organization or a larger organization, whatever, if you're getting an aircraft, and you have to first define what that aircraft is coming to do in the system. Is it going to bring in a different perspective as opposed to the one that has always been there? And then now you go into the nitty-gritties in terms of the operational requirements. And that this means you'll have to itemize each and every aspect
of this change, basically.
Of the change, yes. And then break it down to an extent. And while you're doing this, you have to make sure if it's a process, then the process owners understand it well, so that the process doers are part of blessing the change in terms of it.
Blessing it, I like that.
Exactly. So you did say initially when we were starting that a change could be positive or negative, depending on how it's. And when it turns out to be negative, what happens is it's because probably the stakeholders didn't buy in and didn't understand, because changes are inevitable in the current world. So yes, I think just the approach towards it, the attitude towards the change is what is key, and the effort that goes into making sure that you train each and every member, we bring each and every member on board.
To the level that he or she, either yes. as a main beneficiary or, as you call it, a collateral beneficiary, basically.
Oh, yes. Accurately.
Okay, well, right, it's time for the first letter for today's prize draw. Before I give you that first letter, let me tell you a little bit about the prize draw. In this draw, you have a chance to win $100 cash in each episode. And we do this for 2 reasons. The first is that the game will give you some insight into what inspires my guests here at the table. And the second one is simple. It gives you a chance to win $100. You'll see a web address at the bottom of the screen. At that page, you can submit the 3 letters that I'll give you throughout the broadcast, and that together form a 3-letter code. Every 10 minutes or so, we'll show you one of the favorite books of a guest here at the table. And all you have to do is write down the first letter of the first name of the author. And you'll end up with a 3-letter code. You enter those 3 letters on the Google form page and then click Submit. But you can only submit your 3-letter code until 15 minutes after the end of this session. From among the correct answers, we'll draw one lucky winner and send that person her or his $100 by mobile money. And we'll announce the winner on our LinkedIn page, so that's a good reason to follow us on LinkedIn. Our first book, let's have a look. Ben Carson, Gifted Hands. Who took this book to the studio?
I did.
You did. Aderonke, what does this book mean to you? Why did you take it in today?
Okay, the book is exactly an example of change.
Okay.
Because it's a story of a neurosurgeon that was given no chance to make it. I actually was called an idiot by the teacher, but the importance of his mother having to raise him with him not knowing what the teacher says and believing that he can do anything. He ended up being a neurosurgeon that had to separate conjoined twins, which is actually a fifth that is recognized worldwide. So the book basically tells me the story of a man that was a change.
And he has to deal with the change and how he deals with the change. So it's very relevant to our topic today as well. Well, thank you very much, Aderonke. Nice to know about the story behind the book for you, indeed. Actually, and while I'm with you, Aderonke, speaking of changes, Overland Airways made a major change in September last year when you introduced the first jet aircraft into your Otherways turboprop fleet. How was that change for you as an organization, for you as a manager of risk?
Yes, it was a major change for Overland Airways. And then we had to do a management of change. We need to identify and then go through the steps of a management of change. The new aircrafts, what risk is it going to bring on? What are the things that we need to do? One of the major things we need to do is training and communicating the importance of this change to the entire operation of Overland Airways. It's like it's much more better. We could do more longer routes than what
new routes.
Route. Even our current routes, we will get there much earlier than which saves. It saves and gets us to be more productive and then perform better. So that change needs to be communicated. We had to go through training. We had to go through a lot of practical aspects, practical dispatch, going through some sessions with the flight operations, cabin crew, ground handling, even the support team to know how do you manage this change.
Who is the support team for you? Who would you classify as the support team?
Commercial, finance, administration, because we are going to get in new
sources of revenue.
Yes, revenue. We are going to get in new crew. We are going to get in new support staff, ground handling. You had to change the face of, okay, we used to do self-handling, ground handling before. We had to have a third-party ground handling organization. Okay, so it's a major change.
Mm-hmm. You relate to that?
I think just to probably side with her. When it comes to change, the challenge is when you don't consider the other supporting departments. Like, for instance, you just mentioned the commercial team and the finance and all that. Because often we tend to, and this is the travesty, often we tend to lean more towards
operations.
Towards operational, because the notion is these are the departments that have got to deal a lot with. But if the finance manager does not understand what this change is, chances are the finance manager will carry on with the same trajectory that he or she has been having over years. And it's really going to be an uphill task for the change when it comes to the resources that are required in.
And I think that's also something we say as AviAssist very often. You know, in the safety domain where we operate, it's very easy to lose track of the commercial side of things. You know, one of the things we also always fight against is where people say safety first. Yeah. But in reality, you know, for an operator, that's not the case.
That's not the case.
You know, it's service first and safety always, but it's not your prime priority indeed in that respect. Can you think of an example of what change, for example, for a financial side of the operation would come into effect? Why does the chief finance operator officer have to know about the changes? What's going to change in his life?
Yeah, case in point is I want to give you an example of what is currently happening in Safarilink. Is we're moving a facility which is an approved maintenance organization from the physical address to a larger place.
Okay.
Now, what it calls for is we have to manage each and every aspect of the change. There is the documents and the documentation, the procedures, the entire layout is different. And what this calls for is a lot of change in terms of resourcing, and these are the
investment based. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
So can you imagine if only the maintenance teams are the ones who are carrying on with this, and then the finance team is left behind.
And gets a question very late in the process. Oh, by the way, we need
exactly
extra money.
Yeah, because what happens is they will stall the entire change. Yeah, they will stall the entire change because of the budget that they are running on. So it's quite key for them to be brought on board right at the conception of the change, so that they appreciate, and then they've got to be part of it. And that's why I mentioned you have to define who the collateral beneficiary is, or the stakeholder, and the main stakeholder when it comes to this.
And not forget about both of these groups.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And actually, a point you touch upon brings me to a question from Rwanda, Vincent Nyagaba. If I can start with you, Graham, perhaps. The question of Vincent is it good to fear change?
I think it's good to be cautious of it. So an appropriate level of underlying fear that says change is something that will inevitably bring surprises. So you need to find some way to manage through that. And the different stakeholders have all got an interest, but actually they've also often got a perspective. They'll point something out to you as an implication that you perhaps hadn't realised was going to be one. So you talked a bit about finance and commercial. You know, for us in changing aircraft type, we went from a power by the hour deal on engines on one to buying engines on the other. And so that's now going to have implications in terms of future spend and when that spend is likely to come. And it's going to be quite lumpy when it does. Finance really want to know about that.
Yeah.
But also they often have ideas about, well, you could spread your expenditure in this way or program it that way, and then that helps the operation as well.
And helps with their work perhaps as well from a financial perspective, the cycle.
Yeah.
Aderonke, you mentioned the fact of having external ground handling at those new stations, which again, I guess also has an implication on the financial side of things, again, because I want to move away from thinking that change management is just something that safety or operations has to deal with. Did you get questions from the financial side of your organization about these new costs related to ground handling?
Yes, at the inception, there was a management of change, and it was analyzed what to expect. There was a risk assessment. One of it is we're going to be spending an investment, and everybody had to go back to come up with what risk will this change bring to my department?
Whether it's finance, operations,
yeah, finance,
maintenance.
operations, ground operations, cargo, flight operations, aviation security. So you come up with your own risk assessment. Then we have a meeting to discuss. And what are the mitigation plan that we have in place?
To address those risks that you've
address
seen.
those risks, and how acceptable are those level of risk? And finally, we always ask ourselves this question: what can go wrong?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So once we ask ourselves what can go wrong, everybody goes back to say, okay, let's look at it again. And that's a way we collaborate, because it's something might be a risk to ground handling, and flight operations might have a better view, a position about that particular risk. So even when you come up with your own individual risk assessment, there still need to be a collaboration, a joint review of those assessments.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's time for our second book, actually, and then also to speak about another reward that we have in place. This is Robin Sharma, the monk who sold his Ferrari. I have not seen this book before. It makes me laugh. I think, was it Bruce?
Yeah,
what does the book mean to you, Bruce?
So that's the third copy of the same book I had to. So that tells you how interesting the book is.
You have 3 copies of it.
I've got 3 copies of it. So now, Robin Sharma here details a story about this successful lawyer called Julian Milk, and the successful lawyer has had a success in his career, and he's in a court case, and he breaks down and he gets a stroke.
Okay.
Yeah, while he's at the top of everything. At that time, he's at the top of every part of his life, and he's just not listening to anything because
he feels
his
absolute.
Yeah. So what the stroke does is it resets his equilibrium in terms of life, and he decides to take a step back from the busy life. And being a Harvard scholar, it's always about the next million you're going to make, the next job you're going to have, and everything. And that seems to have been the class around his life. So after the stroke, you see Julian going to a remote place where he joins the sage. These are the yogis, whose principles in life is different.
Different from his pursuit of money.
Exactly. Yeah. So now he starts learning the simple aspects in life and the simple values that you need in life. And this seems to have been the part that was missing most.
Okay.
So the stroke was more of helping him to be more grounded. So the whole concept comes in leadership, and the reason why we live our day-to-day lives, we have to slow down.
Slow down. And actually, I think your topic also connects nicely to the topic of mental health and mental well-being, about which we'll have a separate session indeed, to make sure that you don't just focus on, in his case, like you said, as a Harvard scholar, the next million.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for taking this to the studio.
Thank you.
That's a very nice part of this journey I think we're on as well. Now, next to the reward of the US dollars that you can get, there's another reward from our focus sessions. We also offer you a chance to qualify for a certificate of attendance, following requests from our viewers on that. To qualify for a certificate of attendance, you must watch 100% of each session and score 75% or higher on the end assessment that will become available on our website after this broadcast. But the assessment will only be available for 48 hours after the broadcast. And that means you can best watch the live broadcast so that you have enough time to complete the assessment on our website. Right, enough about the rewards you can get. Let's get back to change management. Graham, we spoke about the commercial side of things and how important it is to take those people along. Cranfield as a flying operation, I presume, is not a commercial enterprise, but did it still come into play for you? You mentioned the engines, the change of costing there, but what other stakeholders did you have to bring along in the change?
Yeah, it was important for us because we obviously work with an airport. The university operates its own airport, and we operate from several other airports around the UK. So now we're bringing a different aircraft type for them. Actually, the way in which we deal with our customers are aerospace engineering students from lots of other universities. So they join the flight at different places, and we need to manage those students and their safety. We're doing it with a bigger aircraft than we used before. So there were lots of elements of change, and I think it really opened our eyes to that whole enterprise risk across everything that we do. How do we make our business successful? We're a university, but we have to earn money to actually run it, and run it in that particular way. And that's a really important thing for us to do. But at the same time, we need to make sure that our customer, the student experience, is really good and that safety is maintained throughout. And I think we recognise that no one organisation has got all the expertise, and that's true even of our regulator, who frequently remind us that we are the experts in terms of the operational risk and in terms of ownership of the risk. So we can't rely on them saying that this is fine. We need to assure ourselves and then let them review our homework. But we need to be satisfied ourselves that this is a safe operation. And my customer ultimately is everybody who flies on the aeroplane and their parents and their family members and so on. And the same for my crew. I need to be satisfied as an accountable manager that we've done the maximum we can possibly do to make sure we have a safe operation.
And address all those risks. Another thing which has been mentioned a lot by all of you, I think, the importance of training on change management. Now, what we find very often in Africa as AviAssist is that particularly the smaller organizations, smaller operators, they can be airlines but also airports, don't have that training capability available in-house. Now, I think I know that for Overland that's been the case for a long time. You have an association with an aviation business school, which is part of the same group. I think for Safarilink that's a more recent thing that you do these things in-house. Tell us about it, Bruce.
We currently do most of the trainings in-house, and it's been a process that we will try to change in. And
because before you were always doing that outside.
Yeah, we had an approved training organization that you partner with, and then they take care of the training needs for the organization. But of recent, we are doing it in-house, and we're trying as much as possible to raise our trainers' capabilities in terms of exposure, both academically and practically.
And now you're talking about your internal trainers.
That is correct.
Okay.
So that is where we are. Or that's where we are heading to. Now, the training aspect, when it comes to the challenge, just to your question, it's quite important for even small organizations to pull their efforts towards one direction. And this could just be as simple as we partner with a smaller organization and then do a joint curriculum for their trainings, so that we benefit and they benefit as well from both ends. And I think that partnership is what lacks in most of our small organizations. And that is the direction we need to go to.
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying initially when we were still smaller than we are now,
yes,
we would look externally for that training capability and maybe work with other consultancy firms or
yes,
other airlines
yes,
that would do that?
Yeah, so the challenge with that is mostly you don't get curriculum that is designed for you as an operator. You'll get a more generic look out there. And we know that it's not as impactful as domesticating one specifically for your needs. And that's why I was talking about the training needs when it comes to management of change, because that is important for you to define. It's not my requirements won't apply to other organizations, because probably what you want to achieve as an organization is A, while the other objective is B. So it becomes a challenge. But what I'm talking about now is partnering where A and B comes together.
For the purpose of managing that change.
Yeah. And the other point I would like to insist on is safety does not have competition. There's no competition in safety.
So you're saying you can work with other...
You can work with your competitors in business. Commercially, we might be competing, but when it comes to safety, we are not competing at all. It's one and the same objective. Make sure that the flight is safe and get the passenger from point A to B with a good experience. And that is safety experience. Yeah, so the best thing is always to partner in that franchise so that you make sure that I look at my counterparts' challenges, and then I discuss my challenges with them, and then we bring that together.
That's very ambitious indeed. I think if I look at Aderonke and Overland Airways, it seems you're a very foreseeing organization or company, because you started a training school almost from the very beginning, I think, isn't it, at Overland?
Yes, this training school came into existence before Overland Airways.
Ah, okay.
Yes, so as an approved ATO, approved by the Civil Aviation Authority. And Overland coming on board made it very easy. We have a mixture of having some training domesticated, having some with the ATO.
The ATO being then the school that's part of the same group?
Yes, part of the same group, but it's a third-party transaction because they're an entity on their own.
Okay.
So it's I have personnel that needs to be trained. I approach the training school in a formal communication. And it is set up. There are some trainings that you have to domesticate because of they're specific. And you can do that. But what Bruce is saying, in the short run, it's good to partner. But as you grow bigger as an airline, you need to be able to own your own training.
Yeah.
And not just because of anything, at times logistics. There is a need to quickly perform a training. What if the ATO is not available? What if the ATO is busy? And at the end of the day, but yes, partnership, we can collaborate in the industry.
But over time, you want to get to that situation where you have it in-house?
Because you can do those training like 3-4 times in a year.
Yeah.
And your schedule might not align with the ATO.
Because your pilots or your ground operations the staff can only be out there for a few days in the training.
You have to run your trainings in batches. You can't release all your staff at the same time. But where it is very easy to collaborate, it's very good.
Well, I mean, we're very excited. If all is well, later this year, we'll be doing some training courses at your facility in Lagos.
We look forward to that.
So do we, actually. It's our first venture into West Africa. But I think it's something you're dreaming of, Bruce, to have this own ATO, the approved training organization.
Certainly. It's a good experience.
Well, you can always exchange cards after this episode. And Graham, in terms, I mean, you were saying before your customers, which is different from them, your customers, especially the students who come to the university. Are you lucky enough to some extent to have change management training in your curriculum so that you can benefit from that as an operator as well, or?
Yeah, well, we have it as part of our safety management course, and actually reflecting on the conversation today, I think that there's an argument to broaden that rather further. Colleagues across in some of the commercial and financial functions will also be doing change management, I think doing it really quite well. So I think as a broader skill, there's something to benefit there, but making sure we don't dilute the safety change management side of it. I think one of the things I've also seen from an airline perspective, if I look at Okay, the other end of the size scale, British Airways got through the pandemic, I think, because it adopted formal change management process to many of the things that were happening. And that included how they dealt with the pandemic, but also how they planned that return to service. You know, what you had there was a legacy carrier that had been around in many forms for about 100 years, having to almost become a startup all over again. and yet there were other startups who in living memory had done that. So it was a skill to relearn, and that management of change really helped with that, to say what do we need to do in what order to safely resume the operation. So it's such an important process.
Part of it. Okay, let's take a short break from this discussion for a message from the sponsor of this episode, aviation insurance broker and risk advisor WTW. We cannot do our work without our sponsors, friends and corporate friends. So in this case, thank you to WTW for your sponsoring. And back to change management. I think you were itching to say something there a moment ago, Bruce.
Not really. It's when Professor Graham mentioned about the pandemic.
Yes.
I couldn't help but to recall the journey of the shock that came in pre and post. We didn't have the luxury to do a formal management of change process initially when we were getting into the pandemic, because everybody was trying to define and understand what it is.
It happened so quickly.
It happened so quickly. There was so much shock, and there was everything. But now, the most interesting thing is when you wake up in the morning and you realize you might not be working at full potential. So what next? You've got to go down on the drawing table and start understanding how much of a resource do you need. With this, what are the challenges? Are we still going to operate as normal or not? Certainly, we are not going to operate as normal. And I think that was quite an interesting term for this particular conversation when it comes to management of change.
And negative change, I guess, in this respect.
Negative change. And then now there was, the most interesting part of it is at the tail end of this, there's resumption to work. Again, a management of change is required in such a setup. You need to appreciate that now this comes to a change, and an organization that might have been operating for 30 years will look like a toddler when it comes to
That's
business.
the same, I think, with Graham, exactly. British Airways having to start again almost.
Yeah,
a toddler.
Yeah. So it was quite interesting.
How is that at Overland?
Yes, it was a change that affected everyone. And we understood the goal. We want to operate despite the pandemic.
Yeah.
And that's why you needed not to say too much, because the message was very clear. We're looking at preservation of lives. Mm-hmm. That was the first change, one of the steps of Overland, how to preserve the life of our personnel.
Your staff.
Yes, in the pandemic, before we even talk of continuity of the business. And of course, we had to do the management of change, because we had to restart the operation under the supervision of the Civil Aviation Authority. The CAA had to give you an approval after they are satisfied with all your change process. So it was a long process, but we had not so much time to get it done. And
because you were keen to restart operations in some form or other.
If you're not going to start as an airline, other airlines will start. So we didn't have so much luxury of time, so we had to work. And it wasn't a normal operation anymore. And there are so many things. The change had to be communicated to staff, what to expect. You have to use a face mask for as long as you're on flights. Catering are not going to be served anymore on board. Crew briefing changed totally. Social distancing, where you're doing crew briefing, you have to do it at the foot of the aircraft. Mm. You can't stay in the cockpit and have your briefing anymore. Quite a lot of changes that affected. But looking back now, we survived and we operated.
Obviously.
So it's actually a very good change that started on a negative note but ended positively. quite a lot of people didn't know you could do an online training and it can be effective. COVID brought that to us to say this training can still take place and the essence of the training will still be achieved. So it was a negative change, but that ended on a positive note. Meetings across now, I don't need to physically travel before I hold a meeting. So
it's one of the silver linings, I think. In fact, even these focus sessions are part of the silver lining, because we used to have a physical conference. Corona made that impossible. I think we partially are guilty of not having a very formal change management process in place at AviAssist. But before I come to the next question from Sabina, there's time for another break. For those of you who are not so familiar with AviAssist, here's a short video that explains you what we are all about since 1995.
Africa, a continent on the rise. Africa is the world's second biggest air transport growth market, and there is a lot to do. Africa is in the process of giving the continental aviation industry a place on the world map, on all fronts. This requires unprecedented efforts, even more so in a post-COVID-19 recovery. It means eliminating a backlog, but also respecting sustainability and CO2 emissions, building safety on the ground and in the air with technical and operational training. More than ever, international cooperation is vital to give what is arguably the most important economic link between Africa and the rest of the world, connecting people across the vast distances in Africa. An essential link, and that's why there is AviAssist. Africa and AviAssist. We have been leading, building and supporting safety promotion for the African aviation industry since 1995. Affordable, independent and professional. We stand up for aviation safety in Africa. We change attitudes and produce safety. Our professionals support African professionals, and we do it with passion by delivering on-site and online courses across Africa and more. AviAssist. Join us in Kigali or anywhere else on the continent. The African aviation industry needs you right now, more than ever. AviAssist.
That's us. Passion for aviation safety promotion in Africa since 1995, powered by volunteers. Now, before we go back to our discussion about change management, here's the third book by von Strompenaars, Riding the Waves of Culture. So the important letter here is the foxtrot that you need for the three-letter code. Graham, I think this book, you brought it to the studio. Tell us about it.
I did. It was actually given to me by a former girlfriend who worked in finance.
Okay.
She'd been to a course and said, I think you should be really interested in this. And it was at a time when I was looking particularly at the effect of culture on safety. Now, this book is not about safety. It's about all the differences in the way different nationalities and different cultures work and relate to each other and so on. And it's absolutely fascinating. Now, what von Strompenaars did was go out and ask all sorts of questions, some of which might sound quite random. One of which was my favourite, which is if your boss asked you to help paint their house at the weekend, how compelled would you feel to help them? You know, at the one end you had an extreme culture like China where people would say, but he's your boss, of course I'd help. So most of them would. And at the other extreme was Australia, and 97% of Australians would quite happily say to their boss, no, I'm not going to help you. It doesn't matter. But actually what's interesting is some of the conversations that come with it. So I remember posing that question to the Australians, and actually they'd say that's not quite right. The answer is it depends whether they're your mate or not.
If they're your boss and
your
your
mate. It's
mate.
interesting that they could be both, and if it was, okay, well, if they're your mate and they're prepared to put a barbecue on and a couple of beers, we'll come and do it. and it tells you a bit more about it. So it's the start of many conversations, and I think that cultural piece is fascinating in aviation.
And I think the change management also has to sit in the culture of the organisation, isn't it? So the more open we are to different cultures, even if it's within one country, the more important, it's crucial really to take that into account. We'll come to a final question for you all. Imagine you find yourself in the elevator with your chief financial officer, and you know you have $10,000 available to improve change management in your organisation. What would be the one thing you'd use that $10,000 for and you would ask your CFO for that money for? Aderonke, let me start with you.
Okay. The first thing, I would divide the funds 50% for training,
Yes.
30% to improve change management, people's performance. If you're able to achieve this, it's as a reward.
Performance-based
Yes,
reward.
performance-based reward for this change. And where everything there's an improvement, of course, we use the 20% to celebrate ourselves.
Okay. That's a very nice one. So training, but also celebrating of success after the change has been affected. Bruce, your $10,000, where would it go to?
Wow, I'm looking. I can visualize that.
It's not for you. Right? It's for the organization.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So I think employee motivation is usually quite important. And motivation comes in different fronts. And one is training. The way the training is administered is something I will put in more of this resource in terms of the training element, just to make sure they uphold a certain structure in terms of the change. Often the worry is changes are perceived to be expensive at any given time. And that is what I'm going to use to offset the notion of
change. Okay, excellent. Graham, your $10,000, where would it go?
Yeah, I think the good news about investment in a change management process is you're going to save the CFO money, right? So they're going to love that straight away. So whatever it is that makes it become a useful tool, so that the reason we do management of change in a formal way is not to create another process. It's to make it easy. So the same as we might think about risk assessment. It's not just because we need to fill in paperwork to keep the regulator happy. It's because it helps us make good decisions. So I think focusing on anything that supports the business to make good decisions fits for that change management process. So it's all the things we've talked about, whether it's to provide some support for people to understand how easy this tool is to use. Or
the tool of change management.
Yeah, absolutely. Or to make sure those steps are really clear to people, that it's the thing that's going to help them do their job, not the thing that's going to stand in the way of making a change.
Well, 3 very nice dedications, I think, for the $10,000. Dear panel members, I'm afraid this is all we have time for today. Thank you very much for joining me here in the focus sessions today, and for travelling from your respective duty stations, far afield from West Africa, East Africa, and the UK. And then to your dear viewers out there from Lagos to Juba, to Yaoundé and Harare, thank you for tuning in to Safety Promotion. If you enjoyed today's focus session, please be our ambassador and tell your friends about the work of AviAssist. We would love you to post a picture of yourself with your certificate of this session on LinkedIn. If you want to help us continue these focus sessions, become a friend of AviAssist. You can do that in our web shop, www.aviassist.org/shop. But also come and visit us at our first AviAssist Safety Promotion Center, the ASPC Rwanda. Lots of exciting courses coming up in 2024 in our center at the University of Rwanda. We'll be delivering this year's edition of our incident investigation course in Windhoek, Namibia. That'll be next month from the 24th to the 27th of June, and will be done in partnership with the Directorate of Aircraft Accident and Incident Investigations in Namibia. Then we'll have our peer support course and an air law course in South Africa from the 11th until the 20th of September in Johannesburg, in partnership with Aviation Africa 2024. And please don't forget, only you can target safety. We look forward to continuing our mission with you to improve African aviation safety. Join us for the next focus session on the 21st of August, when we'll be talking about cockpit and company authority gradients. Same time, same frequency. For now, we say tunatenda to our Shona viewers, and have a good day to the rest of you.